make a difference. There we go. Excellent. The recording is back in progress. Now we're going to have to be quiet and be kind about what we say. So I love Courtney's given us a really some really good detail here. I like that you're creating a portal or website where you can have corporate members to keep their representatives' contact information up to date, like a virtual exhibit booth. Great. Well, when you get that going, we would hope that you're going to share that link and share that success with everyone. That is really, that's a neat way of creating the 24/7 aspect of this. So one of the things that I think is really important, particularly because this has been kind of an interesting year, is for us to take a little bit of time and say, okay, what was the value that we gave these key stakeholders, and how do we keep them connected and engaged in the organization? So the interesting thing is sometimes I view my sponsors as babies when it comes to this conversation about value. And I feel like I really need to teach them how to assure that they have value. And I loved it because someone had mentioned earlier that when you do the post-event survey, you're talking to folks about how they can get more people to stop by their booth, for example. Sometimes I think we really have to teach them. And one of the things that I really spend a lot of time with, particularly a new vendor, a new sponsor, before the event, is I have a conversation with them and I say, okay, let me make sure that if you have any questions, I'm here to answer. Do you know, how are you going to make sure people stop by your booth? I mean, I give them the opportunity to really begin to understand that this is not a passive event or of activity. If you want to be a partner or a sponsor, it's really, you show up is basically my message, but I want to help them understand how to show up. I also want to help them understand that oftentimes it is the power of one, right? It's the power of having the ability to have the one conversation that makes all the difference. What I loved about the earlier part when in the chat, when you guys were talking about how you make connections with the board, so important, right? For them to see those single conversations that make a huge difference. All right. So what I want to do now is kind of tie this to this whole idea of how you can, well, marry these options of bringing of the sponsor to, or the partner to you as a true partner collaborator in this process, with a couple of suggestions here. The interesting, and I just saw something that Karen wrote in, we have no problem for live events, but there's been spotty results on the virtual exhibit space. Yeah. That has been, for many of us, that was a little bit difficult. We did a couple of things differently for ours, but I'd love to hear from anyone else. Did anybody have a virtual exhibit space that you found had good traction? Anybody that you can share your success? I'm seeing a lot of folks hoping somebody raises their hand. Karen. Chat with us.
Okay. Can you hear me now? I think so. Okay. A lot of what we found out early, again, what I was going to say earlier is that as COVID hit, the first thing we did was reach out and invite all of our major sponsors to individual Zoom chats with us to talk about what their challenges were going to be during the COVID thing, because they couldn't travel. They had trouble keeping their contacts up. So what we're finding out and using the platform we were using, and we were using a platform that was familiar with the medical space, is it depends, number one, on the capabilities of whoever's hosting your platform. And secondly, the information that the pharmaceutical groups are allowed to share. Because that's the one thing, our biggest thing in building the exhibit space was they had to have anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks from the sponsor level to get their legal people to approve anything that they put on their space. And so some had good information, some had good connections, some could allow us to put in things where that people could contact them directly through the exhibit space. But and we did, like there were, someone just talked about, Anco just talked about, we did some raffles on, the people who hit most of the exhibitors. And so that, again, that was a little spotty. Because most of the people were not jumping into the exhibit space and the breaks and things as we were hoping they would. So a lot of it is the attendee driven. Some of it is platform driven. And I think the platforms have gotten better over the last year. But when we have a live meeting, we have a lot of exhibitors, and they are happy to be with us. We actually did a live meeting in the summer after a virtual meeting, and it was for our administrators. And I've never seen such happy people in my life. The atmosphere was a family reunion, not just a meeting. So those are the things we go through. But the basic thing is, during the whole COVID experience, we've made sure that we reached out, scheduled regular meetings, talked to them. What are their challenges?
Nice.
What can we do to do better? We offered webinars to people that were a lower level sponsors, sometimes just to make sure they knew that they were included. And we've allowed sponsors to assist us. And we just recently did one, disparities of prostate cancer, where we actually helped develop it, did the web information on it, and got a grant, an extra grant from the sponsor to pay for our expenses in doing this program.
Great.
So, but but let's see what Zelina and Greg is talking about. Webinar fatigue. Oh my Lord.
Yes, we are. And I think that's the beautiful thing. It's Karen, thank you for sharing all that. I mean, the wonderful part about coming on the other end is we are going to be able to get back to some in person, right? So the cool thing that I liked what Karen was sharing, and that I've heard from a couple of you now, is staying in close contact with your sponsors, because just like there was that weird transition to virtual, the transition back to in person is going to be a little bit of a hit and miss. There's going to be people who won't feel that they can come. So you're going to be hit and miss. But with the other thing that we're seeing right now in association surveys of members and of key stakeholders is this idea that if I'm going to come in person, it's got to be something different. I'm ready. Yes, I want to have the family reunion, absolutely. But there's also this sense of how we're doing things different. And I think that one of the important things for us, which you guys are already doing, so I want to applaud you and encourage you to do even more, which is to stay in close contact with these folks and have that conversations. Yeah, I mean, exactly, Dawn. So there's going to be a lot of people who still can't meet in persons. And I think that's going to be, and the thing is that even as some of our areas open up, you're going to need to do hybrid. And so there's going to be, now you have to have a conversation with your exhibitors. It's different. And with your sponsors, it's different. Because if it's hybrid, how do I know how to make that connection with the people in the room versus the connection, that are up here? So I will mention to you a couple of things that have helped us in virtual that we are going to take to in person, and we are using in a hybrid event. One of them is, and I saw somebody said you do some scavenger hunts. So one of the things that we did was I asked our sponsors we wanted to give them the opportunity to be thought leaders, right? And also have the opportunity to be able to follow up with people. So we created throughout our day, our events, we've created, and we continue to do this, a variety of surveys that are based on content polls that are based on content that the sponsors wish the group to know about them, right? And then what we did was, initially we did one, and then the top 5 winners of this quiz had a personal outreach from the sponsor. We've done it a lot of different ways, but what I'm suggesting to you is that rather than trying to get people to go into a room and listen to a sponsor, and then when we're hybrid, because we had a hybrid meeting and I have people that can't go into the room, how do I make sure? So I created these quizzes, which is an opportunity also for a firm handshake, if you will, after the fact. The other thing is when we do breakouts, I take the sponsors, when we do breakouts virtually, I take the sponsors and I get a board person, and I put a sponsor and a board person in every breakout room, presuming that I have the right number. Sometimes the numbers are a little flaky. This allows the board member to make sure the sponsor gets some kind of a warm feeling, some kind of a connection. There's a little bit of chat, a little bit of, oh, did you see that so-and-so is with us? So I pair those folks up. So I don't leave a sponsor in a virtual booth by himself. And actually, this is something that I started with our in-person events. So just some thoughts there. When we go to hybrid, we're going to need to be able to help our sponsors see their logo in the virtual world and their logo in the place that we're holding it. And that's going to require us to continue to have these really good, solid conversations with our folks. So great. So let's talk about, I want to real quickly, and we have about 10 or so minutes left here. I want to share with you, and let me pull myself over here, a couple of things that I have found have really made a difference in terms of keeping my sponsors and my partners really excited. The first is I absolutely tap them into an SME. She just beautifully, Karen just shared that right here. We've seen that a couple of times in some of the chat. I love that. One of the things that we started playing with, though, was not just to have them as a presenter or a panelist, but to have them do what we would call bonus content. So if we had an event, say that, we had a session or a webinar, or at this point, this is something we're taking into our hybrid world. If there's an in-person aspect to it, we're going to create a bonus content. It's either going to be a substantive white paper, or in one case, it was a 10-minute video that took apart in detail one of the concepts, right? That bonus content is available to any and all of the folks that were at that particular event, and it gives our sponsors another opportunity to have their name, their thought leadership, and their reach extended beyond the event. So bonus content was something that we've been playing with and will continue to play with. The next thing is that we really do everything we can to create engagement. Now, I love the fact that you've mentioned a couple of things in chat. One of the things that I have done is I have asked sponsors to lead the chat, to be there, to ask the questions, to constantly be involved and engaged in a way that allows them to be present. And so we've certainly done that. In person, I've had them be the table moderators. Now, it takes a little bit of training in some cases, but it does really work. So I want to embed them in our particular event. Now, the partner, when we do our joint conference, we do some sessions that are together because we want our two groups to get together. And then we'll do a few overlap sessions, but then we'll have usually, depending upon in person or virtual, 2 to 3, which are purposely put on by the partner, and 2 or 3 put on by us. I love it. And it looks like you're getting some answers, Dawn, but how are people handling this? Yes. And you also, I just want to mention someone about VaxCard. I don't know if any of you use Clear. Clear is it was an app to get you through the TSA line, or to get you through the line actually faster. But they also, on their app, they have the ability to have your card, your proof of vaccination, and you're able to use that. Okay. Anyone know if we are allowed to have pharma introduce speakers during CME with their usually branded backgrounds? I don't see that we can do that. That is a good question, and I'm hoping that people will chime in and chat, Carmen, to help you with that. One of the things, because we work with government folks, and there's been a couple of issues around that. When I managed the executive women in government, it was a huge issue because these were the SES level. And basically, we would tell speakers that they could not have any logos on, and that's how they were able to do that. But yeah, so Pat Troy's jumping in. No pharma to introduce CME. Makes sense. Good. So the important thing here, and no brand, absolutely, Karen, no branded materials. So the important thing here is how can you get them as individuals to have that connection? So then the other thing is the creative shout outs. Now, some of these will work for you and some of them will not. With pharma, you're not going to be able to do, for example, a waiting room logo. Absolutely. What I have found is that for a number of the sponsors, we found that a welcome video for an event was really useful. We had it on the registration page, which was really interesting. The survey form, we put their name into the, please tell us about the event, which was done in partnership with, so you could certainly do that. And of course, social media posts. So finding ways to do shout outs. So it's not just for your paid sponsors, but for your partners who are making a difference for you. And finally, the other thing that we've really incorporated in our outreach is pre-event and post-event giveaways and connections. So Karen is saying she used LinkedIn. So there we go. So there are ways to do this within the construct of what is necessary from an ethical or a process standpoint. One of the things that we have found with a couple of our, sponsors, with our other management clients, is the I'm Partnering badge, digital badge, which allowed vendors or suppliers to be able to connect themselves to us. That may or may not work for you guys. Yes, and Twitter for late breaking updates. One of the important things that we did for our Maryland Recycling SWANA session was we asked our sponsors, because everybody had Zoom fatigue, we asked our sponsors to do us the favor of helping update through their own social media some late breaking updates, some new speaker added, last day for a discount. So it was able to get beyond our email list, which was really quite valuable for us. Okay. So we have had some good conversation here and talked about some other things. What I'd love to do is go a little bit deeper here on these ideas of tapping into an SME, creating engagement, finding some creative shout outs, or building event buzz. What are you guys doing along this line to make a difference in connecting in a real and important way to your sponsors and your partners? What other suggestions do you have? Everybody's being quiet. Does anybody use social media? Karen, is your hand back up again? Yeah, good.
Just real quick, since I can't type fast. We're a 501c6 organization, so we have the ability to do a lot more advocacy work directly with legislators and people, and advocate for different types of legislation and actually help write it sometimes. So that not everyone is in that shape, but that is one of the biggest things. If you can find a way to link with your sponsors on advocacy at the local level, we've had a lot of success with state-based, and I know Dave Dillahunt and some of the others have had a lot of success on state-based legislation for PBM issues and for other kinds of issues that affect the cancer care community in their states. But that is a huge one with my sponsors.
Right. And I heard in the advocacy conversation right before we got started on this conversation, there was certainly some opportunities offered up for doing that. So using the reactions or if someone would like to jump off of mute, how are you using your sponsors, really connecting with them in that advocacy front, which of course is an important point because it's meeting their needs as well as the needs of the community. Thumbs up, you guys do this? Other examples of success in it? people are thinking here? All right. So right before Karen shared that with us, I had asked who's using social, and I see that Mississippi is using Twitter and Facebook. What about the rest of you? Are you using any social as part of the ability to do some additional shout outs or to build the buzz around a particular event? So Courtney uses Twitter. So I see. So Twitter seems to be, is that more, is that feel like it's more accessible for most of you? Twitter versus some of the other ones. And LinkedIn. Yes, of course. Okay. So part of what we're talking about today is sort of that pulling together the sponsor, partner, the member, the organization. And one of the threads of reaching out to a broader audience and also supporting our sponsors and our and our partners is this idea of being able to build the event buzz, or build the buzz around the state society, or build the buzz around the advocacy. So it's one of the things I always say is that you don't have to do all the social media. You find one or two channels that feel really good for you and you use it. So Pat Troy is on, I saw, and she's now also home to another group that she and I know well. And I will say that now they are PR people, which is why they are as good as they are probably on social. But they've done some really good things in terms of posting events and meetings of the board or meetings of the committee on LinkedIn, and gotten quite the following in order to be able to make connections. What is interesting is that they have a really valuable DEI effort there. And at the time when they got it got started because we were allowing virtual, and specifically we had some postings on our LinkedIn page that brought in some new folks, and we wound up seating a completely fresh board really coming out of that conversation. So I'm a proponent in saying that the right media channel can make a difference for you. So yeah, Dawn, I understand. I can find it annoying too. I'm assuming you mean Twitter, because you don't do Twitter at all. It's really funny. I don't know how many of you are like this, kind of ups and downs for me. LinkedIn is the one that is my go-to, that I use probably more than others. Any other thoughts on using that as a platform for both supporting the sponsors, partners, and or finding members? So that's the interesting point here is, I think you're making a great point. So I doubt most physicians use LinkedIn. So it's interesting. I'm not going to say that they do or they don't. Part of the value of LinkedIn is, or of any social, is how it increases the SEO. And there's a long conversation, and we're not going to go into details in the minute that we have. But part of what you're doing is the internet presence becomes important for guiding people to your website, for guiding your people to your sponsors and key stakeholders. So at some point, this all just builds itself into a way for letting folks in your key areas know that you exist, know that you are there for the issues, the people that are important to you. So I'm not a big advocate of doing a whole lot on social media, but I think if we're going to talk about sponsors and partners and promotion and how we bring all of this back around together, it does come back to the fact that we're in a digital age, and what is our footprint digitally that allows us to support our mission, right, and move our members' needs. So, all right. We have spent a good hour having some good conversation here. Any additional questions, thoughts, or observations? What are the last kinds of things that we can add to this conversation to make sure that we all leave with an actionable idea? So Dr. Irwin, I'm sure. All right. Yes, Karen, ever so true, ever so true, which is another reason why sometimes having other ways of letting people hear about you is important. Great point. Thank you. Thank you. All right, guys, it has been a pleasure talking about this. Any more questions, or anybody want to jump off mute to add any success stories to this? Oh, great, Terry. That's a great idea. Thanks. Excellent. All right. One last thing I'm going to share with you, and I'll throw it in chat before I finish, is there is a really intriguing article on associations now on pricing webinars. And since we know we will not be completely out of this, I will share that link. I found it to be a good read, and it might spur some conversation, some decisions, some actions on your part as you look at how do I continue to use digital in a way that creates success for my members and, quite frankly, moves the mission forward for us. So I'll throw that in chat, and I am going to throw this conversation, throw the screen back over to my wonderful team over there at ASCO. And thank you for being with me today. And this was a great conversation. I learned so much and picked up a lot from you all. So thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Fabulous presentation, and thank you for all the thought-provoking ideas. And thanks to everyone who participated in the chat. I think it was very helpful and informative to hear how people are doing different things and different ideas. So it's exactly what we wanted to accomplish. So thank you, Peggy, and thanks to participants.
Thank you.
So we will now move on to our next session. This session comes from a recent ASAE Research Foundation study that found that leaders from diverse industries did not identify hubs, associations, as hubs for transformative thinking. However, they thought that associations could and should fuel such exploration, and with members at the center of that work. So this session will provide recommendations on how your state society can use and advance transformative thinking to ensure you are well positioned to tackle future challenges and explore solutions more broadly. Our next speaker, Barbara Bird Keenan, is CEO of Envisage LLC, which supports associations in their quest for leadership, governance, and strategy excellence. For 35 years, she has served as CEO of 4 national and global societies, and most recently, the Institute of Food Technologists and the Endocrine Society. Barbara, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Gregg, and good afternoon, everyone. I was very excited when I was contacted about doing this session because it is really at the forefront of some very exciting work that ASAE is doing on behalf of the entire association community. So really looking forward to our conversation today. And also, Peggy, great job. I love Beyond the Bank. And we actually will be talking about issues beyond the bank as it relates to strategic thinking for associations. So let's go to the next one. So just a little bit about me personally. I love to read and travel and can hardly wait to start traveling again. I haven't been on a plane since February of 2020, so looking forward to that. I have to say my passion for association leadership started early in my career. I transitioned from being a university professor at the University of Maryland Dental School and went to work for the American Dental Hygienists Association, which, by the way, I actually was a registered dental hygienist long ago. So I started in that early. I'd also share that from a personal perspective, I think it's important for association staff to stay connected to the volunteer role in the organization. So I'd have to say a deeply meaningful moment for me in association, working as a volunteer, was being asked to found the Travis County Adult Literacy Council in Austin, Texas in the 80s. I didn't know anything about teaching reading, and I told them that, and they said, well, that's not why we want you for other reasons. And I immediately adopted their passion for helping people to read and was so excited when our Small Literacy Council won a national award, because instead of doing things the normal way of teaching, we took the PBS series Reading Rainbow and adapted it so that adult illiterate parents could actually teach reading to their children, and to try to break that cycle of illiteracy. So let's talk about what our goals are for today. So we're going to talk about why transformational thinking is needed, how it compares and contrasts to transactional or traditional thinking. We're going to discuss numerous approaches for engaging it, from very, very easy implementable ways to things that require a little bit more thought and intention. And then we'll share some examples, and I hope to hear some from you. In fact, I already have heard some from you in terms of how you have looked at sponsorship issues very differently, and partnership relationships very differently than they have been in the past. So when Peggy said go beyond the bank, most of us, I think, have always just seen them as checkbooks. And hearing what they repeated to Peggy, that they wanted to be collaborative partners, that they felt like they had content expertise that they could add. That isn't the way that has typically been perceived. So I'm glad to see that actually changing, because that brings extra value for the sponsors and for all of you as employers. So let's move on. So the way to get things started is to quit talking and begin doing. Walt Disney. So today we're going to do a review of these strategies and tactics that you can apply both in your volunteer role and in your staff executive role. So we will just move on then to giving you some insights from the ASAE research. So earlier this week, I was on a conference call with Doctors Miller and Edel to learn why they had selected this topic. And they said they had read this article in Associations Now that was based on the ASAE Centennial Research Initiative that just concluded. That was a 3-year program to document the competencies and capabilities of organizations across professions and sectors and across activities, and to really try to distill the why these organizations were successful. Part of that research also included surveys of association members from across sectors and other stakeholders, including government personnel, both at the regulatory and the legislative level. And some surprising things came out. These are really the top 5 highlights. You can access the entire report on the ASAE Research Foundation site, but let me run through them with you just a bit, so that you can get a sense of why we're actually here today. So the first thing we learned is that while many associations could document why they actually had launched their award-winning initiative, some of them couldn't. And it was more of a, I'm going to pluck this good idea out of the air and run with it. So we know right now that associations across the board can improve their effective use of research and evidence-base to make strategic decisions. So that we either need to encourage them to have the data to make the decision, or document the fact that they don't have the data, and that's part of the research for their effort. In terms of base mission, the association leaders gave their organizations high marks in what we would call the traditional mission, the traditional product service mix, running meetings, running educational programs, publications, advocacy. But they felt that the organizations were falling short, and that really came through as a disenchantment. And we needed to explore that more, and I will a little bit later on here. So their impact every day. If we are going to put associations in the position of being in the vanguard of leading their business, their industry, or their profession forward, they've got to be seen as always being on the bleeding edge, if you will, not just the leading edge. There's a role and a place for best practices, and there's a role and a place for emerging best practices. And that's We know that this is a capability and a capacity. We need to help associations overall do more effectively. The last two are really the linchpins. The leaders expect the associations to demonstrate transformational leadership. And this is their words. They weren't asked, do you think your organization should demonstrate transformational leadership? This was the gap between the base mission and where they felt their organizations could really be effective at taking on real-time issues that truly made a difference, not only to themselves as members, but to whoever those members serve, whether it's in a business or it's in a profession. So in your case, the patients. How can the ASCO and the state affiliates not only support in a more effective, meaningful way what your member physicians are doing, but how can you even boost your capacity and capability in supporting the work that you do to support patients and their needs? And they wanted to see it in partnership. Moreover, they wanted to see it in partnership with competing organizations and said, for us to be effective, we don't want to just, my words, not theirs, logo slap. So logo slapping is all those logos at the bottom of a brochure or the bottom of a screen announcing an initiative, but really it wasn't developed in true collaboration. Just like your sponsors and your partners were telling Peggy that they want to have, with their partnering organizations. And they basically said, we can achieve great things if we don't care who gets the credit. So we found that very intriguing because a lot of times the association, the leadership wants the association to get the credit and doesn't necessarily want to collaborate with another organization who's pretty closely tied. We believe that the model is shifting. There are going to be times when we're absolutely going to compete. There's no question about it, and there's nothing wrong with that. The whole notion that's been around for 20 years of co-opetition is out there. But on really, truly meaningful issues that really strike to the heart of the profession, the members are saying, we want to see better collaboration, better partnerships. So I think that really tells us we have to think about our work in a different way than we have before, because that hasn't been part of most organizations' cultures. And there's a lot of competition for time. There's a lot of competition for resources that's just been accelerated with COVID. And, COVID's terrible. But I suppose the silver lining of this terrible cloud is that everybody has had to pivot and do things differently almost instantaneously. So let's not lose that agility. Let's not lose that openness. And let's not let the pressure of day-to-day work keep us from embracing what really can be transformational for us. So let's look at a comparison between traditional and transformational. I think it's pretty clear. Lots of different brainstorming and decision-making approaches around traditional. And there's nothing wrong with traditional. There is a role for traditional decision-making. There is a role for transformational decision-making. The key is for us to be intentional about what our focus is going to be as we're trying to approach a problem, or as we're trying to figure out a new way of doing things, or we're looking for a gap between what is and what could be, and we want to consider that. So on the one hand, it's anchored in the current and problem focused. It's very analysis based. SWOT analysis is directly in the traditional lane, as opposed to something like foresight, which is very much in the transformational lane. It is what could be if we didn't have what we had now. It's around solutions, not problems. And it really means a quantum leap in terms of how we're thinking of things versus an incremental path. So how do we move forward? So that's the next slide. So embrace the 80. So to actually embrace this way of thinking and acting and behaving, you're going to have to embrace the 80-20 rule. So how's that play out. It means 80% of the time and energy needs to be spent on strategic issues, and 20% of the time needs to be spent on operational issues. So you can see if you did that, that shifts direction in terms of what's on your board agenda, how you actually meet, how the staff actually work together, how the committees are organized, all of that in terms of what it is going to be their focus. And we're going to talk about scenario planning and foresight skills, as well as 3-horizon thinking in terms of the proven approaches. But those are things that you would need to commit to be able to sustain this kind of activity, as opposed to it just being a transformational thinking event. Seeking member perspectives. Peggy gave you great examples, I thought, of how to work with the exterior partners, and can continue to mine that, not only for what they want, but for also what they see. I will tell you, at the Endocrine Society, we spent a lot of time with our pharma partners, not on the classic sponsorship activity, but really asking them what were they seeing in the environment. It took us to a very interesting conversation, I will tell you, about clinical practice guidelines. And I'll just share that, of course, endocrine did them, clinical endocrinology did them, Diabetes Association did them, any of the endocrine, ASBMR, reproductive medicine, Thyroid Association. And out of that conversation with our partners came the notion of, what if we did something entirely different and we cooperated as the endocrine community on guidelines? And I said that's a very interesting notion, and it reminds me of something in the food industry. Food companies compete on price. They compete on products, formulations, marketing, all of that. You will never see a food company advertise, my Wheaties are safer than your Cocoa Puffs. They don't do that. They don't compete on food safety. And the more I contemplated what would have been seen as a heretical notion, all of a sudden, I have to tell you, it started making a lot of sense to me that if clinical practice guidelines are there to support members' decision-making for better patient care, that maybe we should reconsider that from a competitive standpoint. So I just said that's an example of where our partners gave us an insight into the environment that was not part of the conversation and wouldn't have been part of the conversation had they not been there. That really tapped into their passion. When I have seen members, and so have you, and you've done it yourself, moved mountains when the issue demands it and warrants it. And that's the kind of passion we want to tap into in identifying those big breakthrough ideas that really help to transform. And it pushes beyond wants and needs. Because as you well know, members have very definitive ideas about what they want, but probably truly sometimes can't tell us entirely what they actually need. They actually need us to help figure that out, engage them, validate those perspectives, and then use those insights to move forward. And then explore. Pilot test approaches for fit. Some organizations are going to embrace some of these strategies and approaches I'm going to share with you readily. And for others, it feels a little hokey. That's just kind of too far out there. That's just pie in the sky. That's not practical. That we never could do that. And we'll give you all the reasons why it can't work. So if that happens, you have to pivot to another strategy so that they can see it and experience it. Some of these strategies, until you actually experience it, they do sound kind of conceptual, but I can assure you, you can move past that. And I'll give you several examples. So we're going to move on to what I'm going to call the foundation of moving to transformational leadership, and that's with brainstorming approaches. So that's the next slide. Okay, we're past, Lisa Marie, we jumped a slide. If we go back one, if you would, please. Okay, so Lisa Marie, I think what happened is that this slide deck is the first one, not the second one. So I'll just kind of verbally walk this through with everyone, and then we'll make sure that you have copies of the slide deck. By the way, I do want to give a big shout out to Lisa Marie. She has just been great to work with, and Terry, you couldn't be prouder of her because her follow-up and follow-through is absolutely exceptional. She knew that I had a brand new computer that is back to Windows instead of Apple. And so we tested out this link twice to make sure that it actually would work, so that it was building up my confidence level. I have a skill gap in terms of I'm very tech friendly, but I kind of don't care how it works. So, and I've always had other people working it for me. So that's one of my new goals in life, is to embrace technology more fully. All right, so I had 5 different brainstorming techniques. The first is zero basing, and that is exactly what you think it is. So if we're looking at a project, and instead of looking at how we would improve it, we would say, what if we wanted to have something like this, but it doesn't exist? That helps you see the gap between what it is you have now. Oh, there it is. Where it is we have now, and what we might like to have. So that helps get people in a mindset of incremental improvement. But sometimes you can get a major breakthrough in it. Next is toss the bucket. You might spend 30 minutes in a round robin discussion on any different topic. Either you want to build something, you want to improve something, or you want to fix something. And after the first 30 minutes, you actually take all of those ideas and put them aside, and you start again. And it allows you to think a little bit more deeply, because the first round is usually whatever is top of mind, and it gets you a little bit deeper in your thinking. The third is one of my favorites, and actually Peggy's example of what she did different, what you all did differently with your sponsors, and what many of you are doing, is an example of a judo flip. So you write down all the things, the ways you're doing it now. So with sponsors, it used to be push out the information. And if you're doing a judo flip exercise, you would say, what's the opposite of pushing out? Well, it's pulling in. And then that would give you your example of, you're going to do your outreach to them, get their input, see them as collaborators. It really gives you great insights into it. And now it feels a little gamey, but guess what? The next one's even more gamey. And I called it the X Games of ideation, where it's like you toss the bucket 5 times and you get to these big, crazy what if ideas. It could be wacky to wackiest. It could just be outrageous. But you don't stop there. That is used to clear out the mental cobwebs. And where you go from that then is you look at what's down on the paper, and then you start looking, what can we practically glean from this? So you actually get a little traditional thinking on it after you've broken through the cobwebs. And in many cases, you will find something that sounded outrageous, but it will lead you something that is extremely innovative, and people can see it, that it can be done. The last one is in others' shoes. And that is trying to view the situation from others' eyes. I'm going to give you an illustrative example of that. So I ran the Community Associations Institute in Alexandria, Virginia for 12 years. And when I arrived, the organization was in pretty bad shape. But the relationship between CAI and its chapters, I don't think could have been worse. And in one of my early meetings with the staff, all I heard was complaining. The chapter, they don't give us any credit. They don't give us any help. They are trying to undercut us. I mean, it just awful. And I was hearing the same thing from the chapter leaders. So I thought, okay, we better get under this issue quickly. So I started with the staff, and we had a big staff meeting with pieces of paper with footprints on the floor, and everybody had to stand up in a circle. And at the top of the paper, it would say chapter leader, which would be the volunteer leader, or chapter staff. And every person in the room, and there were 30 of them at the time, had to go around and talk about what they thought the relationship was from that point of view. And after we got to the third person, you saw light bulbs going on, because people were all of a sudden starting to truly appreciate what the challenges that the chapter leaders were seeing. So they really were working at trying to see it through their eyes. By the end of the stand-up exercise, I've got everybody's attention. Now we shift to graphically show this to me. Draw me a picture of what you think the relationship is and what it should be. So the two that were the most poignant, one came from somebody in member services, and it was a brick wall, and then somebody cutting down the brick wall. But the one that to me was most resonated was from the shipping and receiving clerk. And he drew a lamp and a light bulb not screwed together. And I will tell you, the group just was silent after that. And the relationships started getting better instantaneously on that staff side. And we did this same exercise the first time we got the chapter leaders together. So everybody could acknowledge that was then, this is now, it's time to move on. We did have the equivalent of a Nerf bat activity where people could kind of knock things against the wall and get out that aggression and issues. But it changed everything by just simply making them stand there. So these are the baseline issues. And then there are 4 different other proven approaches for, different thinking. And at this point, we're going to, if you put questions in the chat, we'll take them there. If you want to hold them till the end, we're going to have plenty of time to do that, because we'll also want to be hearing about others' experiences as well. So if we can move to the next one. Now we get to the 5 whys. So 5 whys actually is a brainstorming system that was developed by Toyota. So there's all of the 4 that you're going to see probably have at least 50 years apiece of research, documented research in terms of their effectiveness. So lots of people do it different ways. If you go on Google and put any of these on, you're going to have 10 bazillion hits. But at the conclusion of this, I will make sure that Lisa Marie has a detailed bibliography of resources that you can go to learn more and to kind of dig in deeper to those that really resonate the most with you. And then I can point to other resources, and we can put it in my affiliates. So 5 whys is just exactly that. And it's trying to get to actually root cause issue. So I'm going to actually read you one so you have an example of the 5 whys. This was a conversation for customer service. So we're having the dialogue. So why was this conversation so challenging? Answer: the customer was having a terrible experience and was understandably frustrated. I used a tone that was intended to be more formal and serious than usual. I think that this had an effect on aggravating the situation. Second why? Well, why did you choose that tone? In the past, I've learned that when someone's having a bad time, that reducing the overt happiness enthusiasm can avoid making the customer feel as though you're not taking them seriously. Third why. Well, why it wasn't that tone right? In trying to be professional and formal, I think unintentionally I came over as cold and detached. What made this conversation a poor experience for the customer? I didn't take the opportunities to help the customer feel I was on his side, that I could relate to his frustration, and I was treating him like a human being. Last why. Why didn't you take those opportunities? I was focusing more on resolution of the problem than the person experiencing it. So instead of saying, I didn't use the right tone, the root cause was I truly wasn't showing the empathy. So you can use that approach on a technical issue. You can use that on an interpersonal issue. You can use that on a planning issue. So that's the 5 whys. So scenario planning. So I would assume that all of you are using some level of these approaches from time to time. But scenario planning, of course, is very effective in helping us examine alternative futures. For it to be effective, you actually have to believe in the scenarios. So you have to craft something that in an alternate future you don't actually want. So you have to kind of suspend disbelief and put issues out there that actually you would hope wouldn't happen, and really develop them as though they're going to occur. And that lets you have a better sense of choices about risk and opportunity. How many scenarios do people do? Typically, they'll do between 4 and 5. If you only do 3, you generally default to whatever's in the middle, and you didn't pursue something a little further out there. 6, it gets a little too kludgy, and people get lost in it, because most of the time one of the scenarios that you'll pick, so scenario 1, and it's sometimes fun to name them. So scenario 1 typically is the status quo. So you would do the status quo on an issue. So for example, if you were thinking about launching a certification program in conjunction with other organizations, the status quo might be, here's how our existing partnerships run. Then the next one would be, 100% cooperation. We form a new entity. It gets run by a different board, blah. Maybe the other one is, well, no, we actually do it in partnership. So you can use scenarios to actually stretch people's thinking. So it builds your enhanced capacity to perceive the future and to learn organizationally. So, because one of the whole things that I think all of us are doing now and need to do more of is actually document our organizational learning, so that when we have transitions in staff, we have transitions in leadership, we can actually show a path of how our programs were developed, ways that we've considered new programs, and learnings that we've developed over time that approach A for us is better than approach B. So let me give you an example of scenario planning for both IFT and the Endocrine Society. So there was a point in time when there was a lot of conversation about consolidating the oversight of food activity, food safety, food development, food approvals in FDA and USDA. Now you can imagine both of those entities in the government have the same level of a dysfunction as much of Washington, DC does. But we said, okay, what would be our position on this should it happen? So we mapped out a variety of scenarios, and we ended up, IFT, should that happen, has a position on how that consolidation should look, and they have options on how to improve the relationship between the two organizations and not merge. But if that conversation hadn't been out there, we wouldn't have had that conversation to be prepared. At the Endocrine Society, there was a great deal of angst and concern about decrease in basic science funding for endocrine research. So we spent a lot of time talking about, all right, where are ways, how might Endocrine Society influence funding for NIH? And actually we did. They actually shifted a good bit of the funding platform for endocrine diseases, and they're across the agencies, as you know. And we did that through helping them tell better stories. If you actually go on the NIH website, you will see a much improved approach to talking about what NIH does, so that they're building the translation of the basic science research into the translational research into the clinical care. But if we hadn't spent time mapping all of that out, we wouldn't have had that same impact. Now, are basic scientists still concerned about the lack of funding, and is there still a tremendous gap in terms of the public, many parts of the public not supporting medicine and science as it is? But at least getting some of those stories out that become relatable really helped, and scenario planning helped us do that. So on the next slide are two more approaches. So the first is 3 horizon thinking, and you can see the horizons mapped out there in terms of years. So in Horizon 1 thinking, you're focusing on improving and maintaining your core business. So what are our current program offerings and how are we executing on them? So the regular planning that we always do around our existing portfolio. Horizon 2 goes further out, as you can see, and this is where we're starting to talk about new and emerging products and programs in development. We see the need for the program, but it's going to take a little bit of time to get it done. And then Horizon 3 is really our long-term strategic thinking. This is identifying new opportunities where we can start building in Horizon 2 things that can shift then to Horizon 1. Now, if we're in a strategy retreat, we're doing all 3 of these at the same time so that people can actually visualize a stream of thinking, of initial contemplation or generative conversation about program development, all the way into how might that help us improve something that we currently have. This also helps with probably one of the most difficult things any organization has to do, and that is eliminate programs. Nobody wants to eliminate programs because somebody in the membership was so proud of it when it was launched, and that's great, and we want people to feel that great sense of satisfaction. But we can identify when a program has peaked, and it would be more effective for all of us if we don't let a program go into decline, or if we put additional resources into a program that we can't substantially improve, or if another organization actually is doing it better. So when we're looking at our competitive analysis, if we're doing a program that's meeting member needs, is well liked, but that others are doing probably equally well, that might be a trigger for us to say, maybe we should abandon our approach, partner with the other group, and leave room for something else. What really helps in this way of thinking is to look at options, and even from a budget standpoint, to say, okay, this program A costs $50,000, program B costs $100,000, program C costs $250,000. If we had all of that money in a pool, so now we're talking about $500,000, would we still spend it that same way? So that's a little bit of a judo flip question to pose it that way. At IFT, we had a big conversation, my first board meeting, about a leadership pipeline. And the notion was surfaced that the best way to do a leadership pipeline is to identify the committee chairs in advance. So the committee chair in waiting would come to the committee meeting. Now, while I think that's a great idea, I didn't think it was going to accomplish what the group wanted. They wanted leadership development, and that wasn't going to do it. What that was going to do is add travel costs. So I actually, at the break, asked the CFO to tell me what the cost of doing that would be. And at what I thought was the appropriate time, I raised my hand and said, I thought you might want to know what it would take, what financial resources it would take to do this, so that you can choose whether or not you think it's the best use of $85,000, which was what it was going to cost. Is that the best use of $85,000 for leadership development, or could you see allocating $85,000 a different way? Well, the motion went down in flames because I think people saw that it sounded like a great idea, and it certainly wasn't a bad idea, but it wasn't satisfying what it was that they were really trying to accomplish. So that's an example of trying to get people into that perspective. This also incorporates foresight, and the executive directors who are with us know of the great resource at ASAE called Foresight Works, where they track 47 drivers of change. In Horizon Thinking, you do track drivers of change, but most organizations I know don't track more than 10 and typically track 5 or 8. And that's kind of out in your Horizon 3. When you see change coming, but it actually hasn't materialized yet, but you know it's going to be there. So you're trying to get out in front of it and have really deep conversations with members about how to approach that issue if it in fact does surface. So the last one is the most transformational. It is the most conceptual. It is challenging for some people to embrace, but for those who do it and have a great experience, I will tell you, it changes how you look at thinking across the board. It did for me. So appreciative inquiry started in the organizational development field in the 1980s. And it came from a recognition that most problem solving, most strategic planning at that time was really focused on deficit thinking, on things that were wrong. How do we change something? How do we correct something? And if you always look at things from what is the problem to be addressed versus how many solutions or breakthroughs can we look at, in their research, they were finding a real tapping down of strategy. So what they did is they said we should only look at issues from a positive perspective, and came up with a series of questions that you can frame around any issue that you're trying to explore, and you stay in that positive lane. So when you're first contemplating and answering the questions, you're in the discovery and the dream stage. Then you take that information and you start developing the design phase, and then of course delivering on it. And it is actually quite flexible. It would adapt. It does adapt beautifully to a virtual world. Allows multiple people to participate. It's a little bit like Nominal Group in that you can control your own input and you're not having to respond to others' questions and queries at the same time. So I can give you some examples of some questions, and I'm going to give you a real life example of what happened. So this is where you want people imagining things. So just to give you a frame, please imagine and picture the ideal future of our collaborative venture on X. Then you talk about who's participating, what is happening, what is making it so transformational, and you kind of take that story and flush it out. And I'm going to do that for you in a minute. And after everybody spends time doing that, then everybody kind of sits back and looks at it and starts kind of pulling pieces that match together. And out of it typically will come a path for you to do further exploration on. But you'll find that the ideas that come up are generally not ones that would have come out of traditional brainstorming techniques at all, because you're not focusing on the current. You're actually asking people to imagine something that doesn't exist. So what is an example of this? So here was the situation. The Career Development Committee at IFT had its budget cut from $350,000 to $15,000. Their goal was to promote food science careers and to get more enrollment in food science departments across the country. And their approach was to develop print materials and then to go to career fairs at high schools and 4-H clubs. And before I got to IFT, like right before I got to IFT, the leaders said, we don't see the return on investment. That's a big chunk of money. We think these materials look pretty dated. We're not going to pursue this anymore. Where you can imagine, these members were pretty upset. They were very frustrated. They had a lot of passion around this work. And I think they felt like they had been treated shabbily. So I hear all of that. So I said, okay, here's what we'll do. That was then, 350 was then, and 15 is now. So we're going to have to retool what it is we're doing. So let's do a strategy session. So everybody gets together. We're out at O'Hare Airport Hilton. And at 7 o'clock in the morning, I get a call from the facilitator saying that he's sick and won't be there. I go, great. We don't have his notes. We don't have his slides. We don't have his process outline. We got zip. So I just went in and told everybody, Jeff's not going to be with us. I need 30 minutes to just sit and think. So what I did is I decided the best, since I didn't have any of his stuff, the only thing I could do was go here. I couldn't go to any of the other approaches. So I fashioned an appreciative inquiry question, and it went something like this. The president of IFT has just been notified that the career guidance and career development materials that the committee has developed has won the UN medal for getting students into STEM careers. We've also been notified that the National Science Teachers Association will be giving us a major grant. So I threw some other foundation in there. It was all around that this is the biggest, boldest outreach ever. So for 30 minutes, they spent time writing. Then they put it all up on the wall, and we did the kind of, World Cafe walk around. Of 100 different ideas that were up there, only 5% of them were ones that they had ever considered before or had actually even tried. So now it's completely new stuff. So they're very energized. So now we start winnowing down. And 2 key strategies kind of came out, but the core one that everybody was excited about was leveraging popular culture. The notion being that we have all of this great information. We have this great content, but we don't have any access. We don't have any leverage to get around people. It actually is hard in high schools to get the science curriculum is pretty, delineated. How would we make a breakthrough there? So we left, everybody was excited. In a staff debrief the next day, staff person raised her hand and said, I'm really excited about this. Is the Discovery Channel popular culture? I said, you bet it is. So 24 hours later, she has a meeting with her friend who happens to work at the Discovery Channel. Then we go to the foundation board. Within a week, the foundation board agreed to raise $500,000, which is what it is we needed. And within 6 weeks, they did, because the funders were excited about a much more contemporary approach. I mean, at one point in time, they were using mimeograph paper for that and thinking high schoolers are going to get excited about this. Well, we ended up with a website. We did end up distributing it through the high schools because Discovery had the link to the high schools. It went on their TV show. It went on their website. There were materials that they could use for experiments. So the science teachers had experiments. The guidance counselors had information on careers. And after about a year and a half of it deploying, and we were still supporting with new experiments and so forth. So we had biology experiments, chemistry experiments, and I think we had a physics experiment all around food. We got a call one day from the Rutgers food science department. And then we started getting calls from other people saying, we have applications from counties in our state that we have never had applications for. Now, can I show a direct cause there? I can't. I wish I could. But we got credit for it from the schools. And it continues to be a successful program. And the volunteers are excited. We were able to raise the money. The sponsors were excited. And it was a very contemporary way to do something that was very meaningful for the group. So that's really what, it took on. So how do we move some of this to action? So for the next slide, it is through prototyping, get something up and moving, test it out. So iterate, get that feedback. And then when you focus in on it, decide on what it is you truly want to pilot. Then that gives you rapid feedback. If you're on the right course, you're not investing tons of resources and time and effort, and then find out that something doesn't work. Probably the most notable issue that most organizations have had, including ones that I've run, was when we all did the leap to online communities, and we built them and expected everybody to come, and they didn't. And everybody had to retool because there always had to be something meaningful in there. So having something to pilot test before we made those big investments would be a big idea. So all of this really means, yes.
Barbara, so speaking of moving from ideas to action, I think you've given us all some great ideas and very thought-provoking, way to look at how we come up with new ideas and brainstorm our organization. We have only about 9 minutes left, and so I was hoping maybe we could get some feedback from the audience, and I'm sure some people may have some questions for you. So I don't know if you want to wrap it up in a sentence or so, and then maybe you take some
I'm basically there with the last slide. So if you just go to the change one, Lisa Marie, and then we'll just go to the end. So all of this means we are going to be navigating change. All of these strategies are for continuous improvement. You don't use appreciative inquiry to take care of basic organizational needs. You do that that's the quantum breakthrough thinking, but all of those other strategies are in place. I saw this about 25 years ago and it's stuck with me. If you always do what you always did, you will always get what you always got. So if you want something different, you have to do something differently. And I hope I've given you some examples of different tools and strategies that really move you from transactional to transformational. And I'd love to take questions. And as I said, I'll have other resources for you as a follow-up.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand or post it in the chat. And while we're waiting for people to post questions, I have one question. I was kind of struck by one phrase you used, which was document organizational learning, by which you meant, don't repeat things that haven't worked in the past. So I'm just wondering if you have some examples of best practices, how to do that. I'll give you an example of something I'm involved in currently. I'm on the search committee for the senior director of oncology at one of the major institutions here. And someone made a comment in our first meeting, well, none of us were even here when the program started. How do we really know what the goals were? We don't even know how it started. And so, anyway, so that kind of resonated with me when you made that comment. So I wonder if you could speak to that.
So I will tell you, most of the time in the organizations that I've worked with, we've tried to document a lot of committee progress. So with that same kind of changeover, as you've just mentioned, we try to say, okay, there's kind of a backgrounder for every committee. So it has why it started, when it started, what the key actions have been, and what the current programs have been. So if somebody says, where did this come from? We can talk about that. If we're talking about strategy sessions and things that we've tried that wouldn't work, that would all be documented in minutes from that go in the strategy notes. So it would be, here are the people who were here, here's the process we went through, here are the things that we learned, here are the things that we go back that we went and tried, here's where we succeeded, here's where we kind of did, and here's where we no, don't do that again. That doesn't work for us. So that's what I mean about trying to document that.
Thank you. Other questions? Dr. Miller, do you have any questions?
Sorry, I was having difficulty getting unmuted. No, I more than anything else, I appreciate Barbara's trying to shake us up a little bit and think about, I've been a member of ASCO for what seems like forever. And I know that we have made changes and adapted to changes over the years, but I just thought that the concept of transforming how you approach problems and issues as an organization would be one that would benefit the SAC.
Well, thank you. There's a lot here. There's a lot that could be followed up on in terms of training. I will tell you that ASAE is now moving forward after that research where all those results came out. And now we have a three-pronged research initiative that I'm going to co-chair now. We're going to do a literature search. We're going to do a deep dive into the organizations that were profiled in the compendium and identify other organizations that are doing exceptional work. And I would personally nominate ASCO to be one of those because you do exceptional work. I've actually tracked your work for many years. But then we're going to develop a framework for taking an organization, for boosting capacity, capability, and competence of organizations to demonstrate transformational leadership and to provide, measure the effectiveness of their work. So based on the organizations we look at and the literature research, we're going to come up with that framework, and then we're going to test it. We're going to pilot test it with, I don't know how many organizations, and we're going to ask organizations to participate who, are willing to do the work. And we're assuming we're going to have to pay them, maybe not in direct dollars, but you can imagine if you did some of this, it likely changes your staff orientation, your board meetings, the resources that you use for strategic planning, the evaluation tools that you use. Your leadership conferences, it would have a trickle down effect. So instead of putting the burden on the organizations, at least the thinking is right now, and we're very early on in the thinking, and your feedback actually would be useful. What would it take to get an organization to want to pilot test the notions that we come up with to see actually what works? Because a lot of what we do in association management has been incrementally improved, but it has not been quantumly improved. And that's where we think the next big thing is, but we don't have a model for it. So we've got to build and test one.
Well, I can't speak for the rest of our executive subcommittee, but it sounds exciting. Please keep us in mind if you need pilots, and fortunately, if it's next year, why Dr. Gregg will make the decision about where to go with this.
Yeah, no, I think it sounds very, very intriguing, and I think we should, definitely keep a dialogue open and discuss this more. I mean, I think, yeah, it sounds very interesting.
Yes,
And
I will get some tools to Lisa Marie.
Wonderful, perfect. And then I have a question for you as far as trying to get, ideas from, membership. I mean, we don't really have the luxury of having stand around a circle and each standing in each other's shoes. But we do have the State Society Network, which is an online community that our past chair, Dr. Edel, had the brainstorm that came up with this idea. And some questions, if you have suggestions how we can utilize this online tool to maybe stimulate for transformative thinking from our members.
Right. Yeah, that'd be great. That having that tool available is great, and creating reasons for people to access it. I mean, that's one of the things we found in the early launches of online communities. A lot of stuff was posted there, but if it didn't directly relate to the problem at hand, it was just stuff to read. And you all already have way too much stuff to read. It's that really deep curation of information and making sure that it is timed well to your needs to get it to you.
I have a quick comment, Barbara. So one of the slides that you showed up there, transformational thinking, is really contrasting with solution-oriented versus problem-oriented. And I just had this sort of aha moment. In one of the board meetings that I sit on in our organization, our CEO sits down and says, so tell me what's going on. And it's just this like giant invite for everyone to say, here's all the problems that are happening. And I was like, no, we don't need that. I know all the problems that are happening. But I was at a meeting not that long ago where one of the leaders stood up and said, okay, we're going to start this meeting. One, I want everybody here to understand that we're all here to, and we all have the best intentions to solve X, Y, and Z. And then he said, I know the problems. I don't want to hear any of the problems. All I want you to do is tell me for the next 15 minutes, what are your ideas about solving these things? Not what the problem is, but what are your ideas of solving these things? And I have to say, I'm just connecting this now. That was probably one of the best meetings I've been at in the last month. It just changed the tenor of what was going on. I can't say that like we walked out of the meeting and everyone was like, oh yeah, we solved the world problems or even solved what we wanted to solve, but it was a much better sort of twist. And I've just connected that with what you've talked about. And it was definitely a different mindset as we talked. Yeah, I think you need to kind of hear this a few times before it sinks in, at least my thick brain, it does.
I completely agree, Dr. Edel. That's what I was thinking as well. It's a good thing that this presentation will be available later for review, because I think it's very, very deep, and like you said, requires more than one session to really have it sink in. So thank you again, Barbara, for such a thought-provoking presentation. We really appreciate it and look forward to hopefully working with you in the future.
Okay, thank you. Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, our final session will explore where and how engagement starts, your tested strategies and tactics that boost member and attendee engagement, and leave with ideas you can implement immediately. Please help me welcome Amanda Kaiser, who is an engagement specialist and owner of Kaiser Insights, LLC. Amanda has published 33 research studies and has provided organizations with insight into the hearts and minds of members and attendees. And please welcome Amanda.
Hello, hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Greg. It's great to be here. And yeah, if you want to go ahead and just stop the screen share and so I can see everybody's beautiful faces all in one place, that would be fantastic. And okay, so we're going to be talking about member engagement in a COVID world or a post-COVID world. And I don't know about you all, but the pandemic has certainly changed my life. My work went from a lot of in-person to a lot of online. And I have to say about 1.5 years ago, that felt a little bit weird. And now I've learned to use a lot of these virtual tools a lot more creatively. And I feel like I'm kind of achieving some kind of new normal that feels, I guess, kind of normal. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to kind of warm up your typing fingers because we're gonna do some kind of back and forth rapid fire, some kind of things that you can do if you've taken a lot of your meetings online and you're trying to boost participation with your participants. You can see what I do and maybe some of it will translate to what you're doing. So again, warm up those typing fingers and let me ask you all a question to answer in the chat because I am really curious about how the pandemic has been impacting your association. Is it a lot? Is it just a bit, or is it not much at all? I'd love to hear from you in the chat. Do you feel like a lot? Lori says a lot. Yeah, who else? Is it a lot, just a little bit, or not very much at all? Anybody, a bit, a lot, says Carmen. Let's see if there's anybody else who wants to chime in here. Chuck says a lot. Joseph says, I really miss the person-to-person and member-to-sponsor interaction. Yes, I know. And Kurt says more than a lot. Yes, Kurt. Yeah, so I think we're still at that stage where we're kind of mourning what was happening. And then like Barbara was just talking about, where she was talking about appreciative inquiry and sort of taking these quantum steps forward, we're also starting to think about what can happen. So let's kind of sort of ground ourselves right now. I've got to tell you, I've been very fortunate that my family and friends have basically weathered COVID fairly well. But I have to tell you that my car has not been so lucky. I have officially used so much hand sanitizer that I have melted my own steering wheel. A couple of days ago, the fake leather covering that is wrapping around the steering wheel, it actually came off in my hands, and I now have a steering wheel that's very like reminiscent of my dad's old 1970 Plymouth Volare. I don't know if you all remember that, but yes, that's what I am driving around right now. So I'm curious, has anybody melted their steering wheel? Because so far I am the only person that I know that has melted their steering wheel. So if anybody has melted their steering wheel, let me know in the chat. And also, if anybody has any good hand sanitizer stories, feel free to add that to the chat as well. I guess it's sort of kind of like a little bit toxic stuff, not toxic, I don't know. It's like eating away at people's purses and things like that. And Terry says, is that what's happening to my steering wheel? Yes, it definitely might be. Kurt also said something really interesting. I think he said something like, I forgot what a handshake feels like, which I agree. And Marie says, I killed every light switch in my house. Okay, so we have melting steering wheels, melting light switches. So Joseph says, melting the steering wheel could be a great metaphor for COVID. Your keyboard smells like Clorox. Yes, absolutely. Oh, this is really interesting. Right from your world, stethoscope rubber is getting stiff from all of the alcohol cleanings. I bet, right? Doesn't it? It's sort of like it eats away at like all of the PPE and all of this stuff. So, all of this is to say that the pandemic has certainly changed the world in big and small ways, and in sometimes funny, but also like really deeply serious and frightening ways. I don't want to minimize what's going on with COVID at all. So I guess what you're seeing in your associations are some sort of like small shifts and some large shifts. And if I had to bet that you've seen a lot of your valued members shift online, so away from the in-person and into online. And I would also wager to bet that perhaps things are feeling more uncertain, like plans that you've planned may not be happening as planned. I hear a lot of that. There was a whole push in the association industry right after there was a whole lot of vaccinations to go back in person, and then Delta came, and a lot of organizations went, "Oh no, we're not doing that." And I also think that that probably what some of your members might be less engaged now. Some might be more engaged, but some might be less engaged. And the reason why I'm guessing that is because when I talk to association leaders, a lot of what they're saying is engaging members today is tougher than it ever has been. Chuck says, I never thought I'd have more alcohol on my hands than in my stomach. Okay, now I saw you laughing, and now I know what you're laughing about. That was a good one, Chuck. Awesome. Yes, that is a good, appropriate Friday joke for sure. Chuck, I don't know if you were experiencing this, but early in COVID, we did not do the great stock up. And so we were making quarantinis. And so I don't know, show of hands if anybody else knows what a quarantini is, or yes, Kurt knows what a quarantini is. We were pulling out the bottles that we hadn't seen in 15 years that were all dusty. And we were making whatever weird concoction we could possibly make, because that's what you did in the first couple of months of the quarantine. Okay, so before I dive into a ton of data and insights, you should know my take on the chat. Please use it with abandon. This is your time. I'm going to be asking you a bunch of typing fingers, which is why I asked you to warm up your typing fingers. But feel free to ask your own questions, share your thoughts anytime, tap into this great community here, ask your peers questions, or if you have questions for me, Lisa Marie is going to see those questions and we'll get to them a little bit later on. So let's start with a thought exercise. What I'd like for you to do is I would like for you to think about a community that you're a member of. Any community you're a member of. It can be a group from your professional life. It can be a group from your personal life. So it could be a book club, a hiking group, a church group, a quilting circle. It could be anything. Or you could be thinking about, say, another association that you're affiliated with. I don't know if you do, if the physicians do mastermind groups or networking groups or anything like that, but any community group you're a member of. Now, if you might be thinking, oh my gosh, I am a member of so many groups. I don't know which one to pick. And what I want you to do now is pick the one that you love the most. And my question for you is, what does it feel like to be very engaged in a member community? So what does it feel like to be very engaged in a member community? Just type in words, one word, type in one word and hit return. If you've got another word, go ahead and type that in and hit return. Let's get a good long list of returns. So Terry says, understood. Katie says, rewarding. Kurt says, personal connection. Absolutely. Chuck says, it feels very good to be part of and engaged, to be engaged in a member community. What else are you all coming up with? What does it feel like to be part of, engaged in a member community? Barbara says, every opportunity that arises, I think about how it could help that community. A sense of mission is supported. Yes. Energizing, fulfilling, for sure. What else are you thinking? Keep typing those words. Now, if you haven't already, you can grab the little scroll bar on the chat and you can scroll up and down. Sometimes when I ask this question and I have 675 people on a call like this, there's a lot of the same words. And so if you're thinking some of the same words, like you see Carmen's word connect and you're like, oh yeah, that is, I feel connected. Notice that you've got some twins here in your community. And I want you to also scroll up and down and just kind of look at these words and think about how they make you feel as an association leader. Now, these are the words that our members use when they are engaged in our associations as well. And when I talk to members, they talk about being engaged in their association, the words that they use are all of these, plus they might say things like, my association is my professional family, or they might say, my association is my intellectual home. They might even say something like, I feel loved here. And when you read all of your words and you hear stuff like professional family and intellectual home, reflect on how that makes you feel. Now, this is all really great because real engagement is super good for members. Now, I want to ask you another question, and the next question is something a little different. How do you feel when you walk into a party and you don't know anyone else? How do you feel? What feelings come to mind? I'm seeing a few people laugh, right? Because I don't know about you, but like sometimes it's like, oh, I feel that something right in the pit of my stomach. Brian says lost. Kirsty says awkward, uneasy, insecure, more insecure. Yeah, I like it will be work. That's right, Barbara. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm walking into a party and there's strangers, and now I've got to figure out how to get into the conversation and find somebody to talk to. Ooh, Ray, you might be like me. You're saying tall. So I'm almost 6 feet tall. I feel tall too. If that's what you're thinking, you're like a soul sister here, which is great. Okay. Tired, uncomfortable. Yes, absolutely. So, I also want to let you know, no answer is wrong. So some of you might be thinking, oh no, I'm going to walk into a party and everybody's strangers and I'm going to rock that thing. I am energized. I can't wait to meet people. And I want you to know that whenever I ask questions like this, no answer is wrong. We all have very different lived experiences. So many of the feelings that you're thinking about right now or reading in the chat are the same feelings that our members experience when they first join. They feel uncomfortable. They feel awkward. They feel anxiety. They feel shy. They feel insecure. They feel all of these things. So recently I was interviewing a member and her name was Rebecca. She joined her association and she got this just flurry of emails. Welcome, Rebecca. Welcome, Rebecca. So good to have you here, Rebecca. Tons of emails. They were kind of like canned new member emails from the association. And when she read a couple of these emails, it just felt like they were upselling her. Rebecca, come to our conference. It's only another $3,000. Rebecca, buy our research report. It's only $500. Rebecca, join this working group. It's only $50. And she read a few of them and she started ignoring the emails from the association. A few months passed and Rebecca was still feeling mad about her decision to join. And Rebecca's not alone. When I talk to new members, they often say the same thing. So we're going to dissect what's going on here because there's a whole cadre of members who try to engage. They encounter some kind of barrier, and then they decide that the association is not for them. And I'm going to go ahead and share some slides with you if I can. There we go. Share. All right. And anytime or anywhere a new member tries to engage for the first time, one of these barriers can pop up. We're going to talk about some of the common barriers, and then, like Barbara was saying, we're going to think about how we sort of quantumly move forward from there. Okay, so there is a new member. There's our new member feeling all alone, and there's us wanting to welcome them. And there's the barrier in between us. There's this metaphorical pit or abyss that proves to our new member that our organization is not for people like them. So what we need to do with new members especially, but with all members as well, a lot of these tactics are going to work for all of your members, is build a bridge to them. And we need to build a bridge to them because new members don't know when they join, what the value of the association is. They don't know what your benefits are. And they have no idea that your solutions make their lives and organization better. Now, this sort of flies in the face of how a lot of association leaders think about that decision to join. often when we think about the decision to join, we think, oh, they joined because they know what we offer and that's why they joined. But that is actually not the case. People join because someone they respect indicated they should join. It might be a colleague, a peer, a manager, a vendor, a professor, a rock star in the community, somehow indicated that they should join. And I've got this interesting stat, but first I'm curious to find out from you. There we go. What % do you estimate of your new members join because of word of mouth? Just type in a quick number. It totally does not have to be like, statistically valid number here, just off the top of your head. Brian says 75%, 90%, 75%. Yeah, 90%. Yeah, so it seems like for your group, you are somewhere in the 75 to 90% best majority. So most people find out about your associations from word of mouth. This is super common. In fact, there was a study done by Marketing General of the association community, and 80%, they estimate based on association leaders estimating word of mouth, that 80% of the time members join because of word of mouth. So they're not joining because they know what your benefits are, what you offer, how you're going to make their lives better. They're joining because somebody told them to join. So they're very much like the guest at a party that arrives without knowing anybody else in the community. They don't know the community's culture and they don't know the community's mission. So it's our job to take these members and attendees under our wing and make them feel comfortable. So let's talk a little bit about how to do that. So in the past, when we wanted to give members tours of the association, we used to give them lists of our benefits. This is pretty common in a lot of associations, and maybe you guys don't do this, and maybe you do, but lists are very common on websites. Most associations like to include this very long list of benefits on their welcome websites and their welcome letters and their welcome emails, or these stuffed welcome packets. And if you're doing this, or if you've seen this before, a welcome letter or welcome email will go something like this. It'll say something like, welcome, Rachel, to the association. You are now entitled to 37 member benefits. Please review this list so that you know what you have access to. You have access to 12 monthly meetings that bring together 773 members. You have access to 7 white papers written by our state's committee. You have access to 20,203 articles on National's website. You have access to 43 webinars and research reports and more and more and more and more. And this doesn't work longer, because if you're like this member, you're super busy and so is everybody else. So they don't have time to parse through all of your benefits. Actually, when I talk to somebody who's not satisfied, very often what they say is they'll actually even blame themselves. They'll say, I know that there's a ton of value in this association. I know it. I can see it. There's so much information. I just don't have the time to figure out what I need. So they'll blame themselves, but we can help get them what they need a lot faster. Okay. So since our members don't have time to look through the benefits and figure out what will help them, we can do it for them. Now, here's something that I learned in my research with members, is that when we make engaging with the association tough, we train our members to ignore them. So when we want them to join in, say, advocacy efforts, or take advantage of a new benefit, or come to an event, or participate online, or take part in our communities, they're too busy ignoring us to see the new news. Now, this might I don't know if this happens in your associations, but this is a pretty common thing where some big, something that we need to rally the community for. There's legislation moving through the government that's really alarming. There's a new product launch that's going to change everything. We're doing some innovation around events and it's totally different. And you think, oh my God, they're going to love this. They're going to love this. They're going to love this. And you send it out into the world and you hear crickets, not much. And what is probably going on is probably that members are just in that mode of ignoring. So we need to break through that ignoring. We're going to talk a lot about that today. One of the ways to break through ignoring, them ignoring you, is to anticipate what a member's problems are and then feed them just the solution that they need. So here's an example from a dentist association that I recently worked with. When newly graduated dentists start practicing, some dentists set out to open offices, or they'll buy a practice from a dentist that's ready to retire. And I got to tell you, after talking to about 35 dentists, that first year is so tumultuous for them. And the reason why is dental school does not prepare them for the business side of their profession. They learn about teeth and gums and mouth health, but they don't learn about running the books or dealing with insurance or the art of managing office staff. So this is the kind of problem we want to go looking for, because members are going to be really receptive to solutions to their current problems. And while we're giving them the solutions to the current problems, we can kind of give them a tour of the benefits. Like, oh, we have the solution for you. We can, we've got this article for you about dealing with managing office staff, or we have a webinar about how to deal with insurance companies. And so they get to see that, oh, wow, there's articles, there's webinars, there's conferences, there's networking. So this is a good time. We could even use some of Barbara's skills. She talked about all of these brainstorming styles. I wrote them down because I thought, oh, this is really cool. I want to get into this. Zero basing, toss the bucket. I kind of especially liked the edge storming. But let me ask you to go ahead and think about this question. What are some of the problems that clinical oncologists might be having when they first join your association? Now, what I gather is some of your members are in academia, and some of your members might have a practice. Maybe some of your members work for big practices or hospitals. And so you might think about your members as being in different segments, which is great. And so this doesn't have to be, your answers don't have to be, for all members, but even if you get thinking about a segment, what are some of the problems your members might have when they first join your association? So if you want to go ahead and sort of think through that and add your ideas to the chat, that will help the whole community think through this. Now, while you're doing that, I want to show you a pro tip. It's kind of like brainstorming, but I call it problem mapping. So what I want to do is I want to go to over to the internet and show you something that I've set up. It's called a problem map. And what I'm showing you right now is a virtual whiteboarding platform, and it's called Miro. It's MIRO. Let me also drop that into the chat. MIRO.com. There's also another one called Mural. You can even do whiteboarding. Let's see, on Google Jamboard, that's free. You can do whiteboarding within Zoom. But let me show you this template that I've worked up. It's an example of what a problem map can be. So in this particular case, what I'm thinking about is new members. What kind of problems do new members have? And then if you look at the columns, there's the new member situation, there's the specific problem arising out of that situation, and then our specific solution. So new members have a bunch of different things going on. They might be new to the profession. They might be new to their organization. They might have started a new business. They might be new to their career. They might be starting a new project. And if you start thinking about all of the situations or goals or milestones that segment of member has, then that'll help you sort of think through the situation that they might be facing. And then you can map that to a specific problem. Now, when you think about somebody being, say, new to the profession, that might actually spawn 6 or 10 specific problems. I've only mapped one here just so that you would actually be able to see this in Zoom. And the one that I came up with is, if you're new to the profession, you probably don't have a network. You don't have anybody to bounce ideas off of. You don't have anybody to normalize with. You don't have people that you can lean on for support, all of those things. And then if you were to say, okay, so let's focus in on that one problem that our new member may not have a network. One of our specific solutions could be that we have virtual roundtables. And this is a virtual networking roundtable. Now, this is really important because later on, we're going to talk about how to message this stuff. And you'll see where these specific problems and solutions come in really handy. This is something you can do with your board. It's something that you can do with staff people. You can brainstorm asynchronously, but it's really great to kind of map out, what your members are dealing with so that you can approach them on this sort of, you've got a problem, we've got a solution sort of basis. What I am seeing here in the chat, when I asked you what some of the problems that new members are having, Don says too many demands on time to attend meetings for sure. Joseph says my problem is figuring that out. Yes, absolutely. Sometimes it is fun to brainstorm with your leadership, with your board about things like this. Connecting to colleagues in our community and making connections. Texas is a large state, so it's hard for some people to travel to events. For sure. Yeah, I bet you, Ray, you're not alone. Probably Florida and California, even where I'm in Pennsylvania, it's 5.5 hours all the way over to Pittsburgh. Travel is tough. I've got to say, virtual has been kind of cool in that regard because a lot more people are coming out when they couldn't before. Okay, so let's dive into some of those specific tactics that I promise that I'm gonna get to you. So the first one is email. Now, email is the primary communication channel for most associations, and it's a great way to engage members. But it is also a way for members to start ignoring the association. We don't want that to happen. Now, why would our members start ignoring our emails? Well, let me ask you this question because it's really important. How many emails do you estimate that you get every day? How many emails are pouring into your email box? I'm gonna guess for me, it's probably about 200. And Barbara beat me right off the bat with 500. Katie says 100. Julie says 400. Right. It is a ridiculous amount of emails. And everybody is over the hundreds, right? So if you estimate that it takes, oh gosh, even 30 seconds to process most emails, because some emails it takes 15 minutes to process and other emails you can just delete. This is a huge chunk of time, right? It's ridiculous amount of how much time we have to spend on emails. So what we have all learned, every single one of us professionals, is that deleting email is good. And when we delete email, we get that little shot, right, of endorphins or serotonin or something happy. I don't know, some kind of happy hormone goes off and says, you are doing good things, you're being productive. And so if deleting email is a good thing, we learn very quickly how to filter what we need and what we don't. And if something is not immediately important to us, it's not critically important for what we're dealing with right now, the filter turns on in our brains that says, I'm going to read that later. And you know what happens is later never comes. They're going to see your association in the from line, and they're going to say, oh, I really want to get to read that, but I'm going to do it later, and later never comes. So we need to engage people, especially those new members, within the first 3 emails. And let's talk a little bit about how we do that. Now, one of the first things you want to consider is the format of your email. If you're sending a lot of email messages, brevity is key. Try to keep emails to members around 5 sentences or less. They'll want to read your emails in just a few seconds. And to illustrate this, at some point, go into your personal email and just look at the emails from big companies. Look at JetBlue, look at Apple, look at, all of these big companies and see how they're doing it. They're short. They're so short. A lot of the companies, sort of best in class marketing savvy companies that I get emails from, those emails are a headline, a sentence, a phrase. They might even be just 3 words. And why are they doing that? They found out through lots of testing that these super short emails get a lot of attention. And you're saying, oh my gosh, but we've got so much that we need to share to our members. How could we do that? Well, let's talk a little bit about how, because whenever you find yourself writing lists like this guy, or you're writing paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, try rewriting the email. So here's some tips that I have, and these are what I call my 5-step frictionless formula that member organizations can use to create short, fast, frictionless benefit, product, or event emails. So I'm not talking about newsletters per se. I'm talking about when you're kind of announcing something like, we got a new product, we have a new report, we have an event coming up, those kinds of emails. So the first thing you want to do is you want to identify a member problem. What member problem that you're going to solve, and you're talking about it from their point of view. So an example might be, many members like you are worried about the latest legislation being considered right now. So that's identifying. So you got that member problem right out there. Your second sentence is connecting with the feelings that this problem causes. So it might make people sad, angry, uncertain, whatever feelings you have. So the first sentence is, as an example, many members like you are worried about the latest legislation being considered. This might have you worried about increased costs or time. Number 3 is to show your solution. So this is your benefit. It could be a link to an article. It could be a link to a video. It could be a link to a resource. So in this example, I've said, many members like you are worried about the latest legislation being considered. This might have you worried about increased cost or time. Show your support for our advocacy efforts. Number 4 is click the link. It's act. It's click our link. It's a call to action. So for example, it could be watch a 2-minute video, read this short article. So in my example, totally fictitious, but I have, many members like you are worried about the latest legislation being considered. This might have you worried about increased cost or time. Show your support for our advocacy efforts by signing the petition or sending your state representatives a message. Number 5 is to what I call sprinkle some fairy dust, make it fun, make your writing conversational. Now this is a balance. I totally understand that. We want to be professional, but sometimes professional comes across as a little bit too institutional and it's hard to read. So if you've got something really serious, you don't want to make it super fun and jokey. No, we don't want to do that. But maybe we can make it just a little tad warmer, a little bit more conversational. So think a little bit about that, because warming up your writing, your tone can sometimes make things much more engaging. Now, let me go back to this, because I don't want to jump off of emails yet, because some of you might be thinking, wait, we do e-newsletters. And when I was talking to Lisa, Marie, and Terry earlier, they said that many of your associations send out e-newsletters, and this is great. And some of these mechanics still apply. So you can make your e-newsletter very short. You can also make your using headlines and links and stuff like that. You can also make it easier to read and not ignore by making things scannable by having descriptive headlines. You can also, and I see more and more professional organizations doing this. If they're linking to articles, they'll read the article and then they'll tell people how much time it takes to read an article, so they know what kind of time commitment they're getting into. I actually really love that. You can also prioritize content, so the items that are most important for them to read are at the top. Now, these are just some tips for engaging, for writing more engaging emails. And again, this is super important because email is often one of those barriers that sort of flips that switch in people's minds that allows them to ignore the association. We don't want them to do that. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful. And let's go on to another strategy for you to think about. And this is first impressions. Now, our brains are first impression noticing machines. And I'm going to play with this idea with you for just a little bit, because I want you to think about a super memorable, strong first impression that you had. It can be positive, it can be negative, it can be any interaction with any industry, a company, an organization, a brand, a person, or a product. And I want you to kind of get that first impression that you're thinking about into your mind. And my question is, you totally don't have to tell me your first impression story, but what I'd like to hear is, when you think about a very strong first impression you've had, where were you when that first impression happened? I love asking this question, and I have heard some really, really interesting things, like at the top of a mountain, or in church, or Chuck says in a car dealership. Ooh, that would make a really, really good story, I bet. And people, when people are thinking about first impressions, they sometimes recall stories about first dates with their spouse, the first day of college, in the consumer world, walking into an Apple store for the first time, or starting a new job. We have first impressions about all sorts of things all the time. And when you think about your very strong first impression story, do you think that it changed your view for the long term? Because what science has found is that when you have a very strong first impression, that it actually colors your view of that person or place or brand or group of people or organization, or even our associations for a very long time. So what we want to do is we want to have very, very good first impressions. So research studies have shown that people form their first impressions in, amazingly enough, 3 seconds. Some experiments at Princeton have even suggested that it's less than 1 second. 3 seconds is too scary to contemplate, so 1 second is even scarier. But scarier still is, even in the face of facts later on, we have a hard time moving away from our first impressions. So remember that your first impressions color your thoughts about a person or a group of people or a business or an organization for all of the subsequent interactions, again, even for our associations. So it might be worthwhile to brainstorm during your next board meeting all of the first impressions that members might have with your association. So think about all of those points of first contact to going to an in-person meeting, or attending a virtual meeting, or going to your website, or getting an email from you. And think about how first impressions are sending signals to even our longtime members. The first time a longtime member tries something new, or they log on and see a group of people that they want to connect with. And then also start thinking about how you might take those first impressions and make them better. So you can map all of these points of contact, all of these first impressions, and think, how can we make them better? And here's a couple of ideas. There's so many things that you can try, but one thing that's super cheap is just to warm up the association. Some associations who do this do things like, well, actually, I think the sort of mindset they put on is sort of think about greeting everybody as if they were old friends. So they warm up their writing. They seek out folks who are standing alone during events and welcome them into the fold. They welcome people by name in the chat and virtual events. So just all of those little touches, anytime there's an opportunity to be just a teeny bit kind to somebody, that really helps those first impressions. Okay, let's talk a little bit about curated networking, because this is one of my other favorites. It is so hard for people who don't have a network. And one of the things that I saw you say early on is it's really tough for your new members to connect with other people. And this is one of those universal problems. It's tough to walk into a group of strangers and suddenly find friends. And it takes a great deal of courage to go out on a limb. So that's why I love curated networking. And a healthy, hearty welcome can really break the ice. One of the things that I found in my research is, if you can reach out to somebody for the first time, somebody who's not talking, somebody who doesn't have a network, and just talk and chat with them for just a little bit, they'll take the initiative to go ahead and make the experience fun for themselves. It's like when you connect with them that one time, it gives them permission to go ahead and talk with everybody else. They start thinking, oh yeah, this group of people is my group of people. and everybody's nice and they're open and they're generous, and I'm going to go talk to other people. Now, when we're back in person, you can demonstrate this, you can model it in your own organizations, and you'll be surprised to see how, as you're modeling it, people pick up on it and they do it as well. There is a really interesting association in medical publishing that I worked with. And one of the things that they do is in their in-person events is they have this culture of where longtime members will walk up to new members and they'll say, tell me a little bit about yourself. What are you doing? What are some of your goals? And they'll listen very closely and they'll say, you know what? I've got 1 or 2 or 3 people I need to introduce you to. Come with me. Let me introduce you to some people. That's really, really great. So that's one way to curate networking. You can do this online. You can do it via phone. You can do it in the chat in your events. So many cool ways to try that. Okay, priming for participation. This spring, I ran a virtual networking incubator with my colleagues at Matchbox Virtual Media, and our goal was to figure out how to make virtual networking meaningful, comfortable, and fun. And we learned a ton while we were doing it. One of the things that we realized was one of the reasons why networking events, and especially virtual networking events, is uncomfortable is people don't have a lot to do. They just sort of can stand around or they chat. And it can be really awkward. So one of the ways that we can take away these feelings of awkwardness is by priming for participation. And because it gives people something to do. So one of the best ways to prime for participation, and you can do this whether it's a networking event or whether you're putting on some kind of education or something like that, is ask early on. So very early on, get people, get their typing fingers warmed up, and get them, interacting with you in a very low key way in the chat if you're virtual, or if you're in person, maybe you ask a quick question where you can get a show of hands, just something where there's a two-way dialogue between you and all of your members. And as time goes on, you can ask more and more and more in-depth questions. Now, I've got a whole mini book about virtual networking to share with you in just a little bit. I'm going to give you a whole list of resources to take back, because I could sit here and talk to you for 5 hours, but we only have 1 hour. So I'm gonna wrap it up now. When we talked about some interesting things, I think anyway, emails, first impressions, curating networking, priming for participation, and I'm going to leave you with one last very different way to look at member engagement. So if you think about your brain, everybody's brain being divided in half, and on one side we have our very emotional side of our brain, and on the other side we have the rational side of our brain. What I see associations doing a lot is I see associations talking to members with the rational side of their brains, or appealing to members' rational side of their brains. We talk about value all the time. We focus very, very much on value. And when members talk to us, a lot of the time, they'll talk to us about the value they got. And so I think that's where that came from. We focus on one half of the member engagement formula. But there's a lot of really interesting studies that are coming out about the way that we make decisions. And at least half of the decision-making power comes from the emotional side of our brain, if not more. In fact, there was actually a study that I was reading pretty recently that was pretty interesting, that our emotional sides of our brains actually make the decision, and then the rational side of our brain rationalizes it. But the emotional side of our brain is all about the experiences. So we provide value, and our members are kind of categorizing, and they're cataloging, and they're remembering experiences. So let's dive into this a little bit, because this is super important, because when you're talking about boosting member engagement, the formula for member engagement is value plus experiences. And again, I think we're talking all about value and associations, but we're not talking about the experiences. So member value, this is easy for me to explain because it's what we've all been working on, right? It is the tangible, it's the rational, it's the benefits. It's when we say this association is worth my time, or this event is worth my attention, or this report is worth my money. The experience side of it is a little harder. The experience side is soft and gushy, right? It's intangibles, it's feelings. It's the way we might provide a great experience is through welcoming. The way we feel great experiences is through connecting. We have the experience of belonging. And while it's soft and gushy, experiences are soft and gushy, there's a lot we can do as association leaders, whether we're on the ground in the day-to-day, or whether we're an oncologist who's the leader of the board, the chair of the board, or on the board. There's a lot that we can do to help make these experiences greater. And what I challenge or invite you to do is really start thinking about not just the value, but beyond the value. How are we going to create these great experiences? Because when we get very experience focused, we figure out ways how to make people stop ignoring us. And when they're not ignoring us, then they tune into the advocacy and the benefits and the events and everything that we need them to. Okay, so I promised you some resources. So I write a weekly blog all about member engagement. So if anything here appeared really was interesting for you, you can go ahead and head on over to my blog twice a week. There's new articles about member engagement. Now, when we were talking about priming for participation, I told you about a mini book that I just published. And if you are hosting events online, I hear this a lot. So if you're hosting events online and you've given up on the networking part online, I invite you to check out this newly published virtual networking roundup report. And I wrote it and published it with my partners, Matchbox Virtual Media. So the book lives over on Matchbox's site. And there are lots of ideas there for making networking both virtual, but also if you're starting to do in person, there's some places where there's lots of in-person events happening. And if you're one of those associations, there's ideas in the book for both virtual and in-person networking. It makes, the whole idea is we explored with 150 participants how to make virtual networking and by extension, in-person networking far more meaningful, far more interesting, far more comfortable, and far more fun. So you can check that out. And finally, we talked about engaging members today, but one of the things that I have found in my research is if you can engage a new member early, you engage them for life. There's a real big pivot point when you've got a new member. So if you've got this influx of new members coming, it's worth taking a spin through the new member engagement study. You can find that over on my site. All of these resources are for free. And I invite you just to open them up, scan a little bit through them. So, okay. So with that, I want to thank you for attending and thank you for chatting with me. And I'd like to hand it back to you folks and find out what questions you have. I'm going to stop sharing and find out from either Dr. Greg or Lisa Marie if you have any questions for me.
Thank you for a great presentation, Amanda.
Thank you.
Very, very dynamic. So, and I did read your blog, and it was excellent. I highly recommend it to everybody. So
thank you.
I heard you were speaking. I read all about you, but you have some great ideas.
That's awesome.
So questions?
I don't know about anyone else, but I'm pretty excited about shortening the length of my emails now. I see Lori's nodding her head, so she might be in agreement with me.
Yeah. Yeah, it might be easier, for you as the creator as much as it is, easier for other folks to read, for sure. If it's okay with you, Dr. Greg, I'll chime in here because one thing that occurred to me, and maybe Peggy mentioned this, I only caught the last 10 minutes of Peggy's talk when she was talking about, sponsors and partnering with your sponsors. But As we think about those experiences and wanting to welcome people and wanting to welcome personally, if you've got sponsors in your association, sometimes they're salespeople and they're sort of like, they're just like naturally friendly and personable and, like sort of very all around lovely folks. They're really great welcomers. You can ask your sponsors to stand at, the doorway into your conference. You can ask them to, be a host on a virtual meeting in the chat, and watch out for new people and kind of model good chat behaviors and welcoming people and stuff like that. That's one more way. And Peggy might have talked about that, but it's one more way to bring your sponsors in as partners.
No, I think it's a great idea. I mean, a lot of our partners are definitely the extroverts, and our members can be the introverts.
Okay.
Okay. There is a comment in the chat from Chuck. Can you see it, Amanda?
I do. Big problem for SAC is getting more feedback, not just from the council members, but from the non-council members. State Society Network is having very slow growth.
Yeah, and this is our online network that we're trying to get members to provide feedback, questions, suggestions to the council.
Okay. And so far, it sounds like maybe the leaders are the ones doing the sharing, but not sort of your core everyday members.
That's correct. Lisa Marie, you and Terry can probably answer this question better.
Yes, that's correct. So we're really trying to promote that the society exists, through the executive directors pushing out communications, but right now it's a pretty slow growth. Yeah. But it's getting there.
Okay. Sometimes it is. Sometimes things are slow growth, and so there's a couple of things that you can do. You can start testing a bunch of topics. If there is the ability to test different topics, and where you see some topics spark, maybe you could send a little blurb from that topic that's provocative or eye-catching or stuff like that, out and say, hey, this really important conversation is going on. We want to hear from you, and maybe that'll catch people's attention. Sometimes it's all about social proof. Sometimes people, one of the things that I find as a speaker when I'm doing presentations for huge audiences. So back in the early days of COVID, I spoke at one of ASAE's conferences, and just for my session, there was something like 675 participants. And people, the chat was just flying. I couldn't read it all fast enough. And that's social proof, where people see everybody else participating and they start to participate, and it kind of snowballs. So if there's a way, after you've found something that really resonates, if there's a way to say, many or 33 or so many of your peers are jumping on here to add their thoughts or to share thoughts, or that might be yet another way to do that.
Great ideas. Thank you.
Okay.
So I think everybody's going to spend the weekend going back to see if their steering wheel is melting, right? All right.
All right. Thank you, Amanda. Great presentation. Thank you so much for participating. And so I think with this, we are about ready to close our meeting. I want to thank all the speakers today for their great presentations and their tips and suggestions. It's certainly a lot of things to think about over the next weeks and months, and hopefully make some changes in how we run our organizations. Please remember to complete the online leadership conference evaluation form, which was sent to you via email earlier today. And feedback should be submitted by Friday, October 29th. This feedback will be used to help plan next year's session and determine where additional resources are needed. So please respond. And thanks to all the participants in this year's Virtual State Affiliate Leadership Conference. And I especially want to thank Lisa Marie Pratt and the rest of the ASCO staff for making this meeting a success, and also for everything else that they do for us. So everybody have a great weekend, and I look forward to the opportunity for us all to be together, hopefully in person soon.
Complete the evaluation, please.
Please, for Lisa Marie's sake, please complete your evaluations.
Enjoy your weekend. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.